God's chosen on. Some truths aren't yours to speak. Heaven is sounding the alarm. What if the delay wasn't punishment, but protection? What if the silence around you wasn't emptiness, but God, hiding something holy from the hands that would mishandle it? Chosen one, you didn't ruin your destiny, but heaven is asking you to protect what's still being formed. Because not every smile is safe. Not every question deserves an answer. And not every divine blueprint should be spoken aloud before it's sealed in prayer. If your soul has felt the weight of oversharing, this message was written in silence, with your name on it. The weight of unfinished words. There's a silence that doesn't feel holy. It feels haunted, like something you said too early is still echoing in the wrong room. Naomi knew that feeling well. She wasn't reckless, she was faithful. When God first whispered the vision into her spirit, when the dreams became more than coincidence and the confirmations showed up like breadcrumbs from heaven, she did what any passionate believer might do. She shared, not for praise, not for attention, but for connection. Because it's hard carrying glory in silence when your heart is breaking with hope. But something shifted after she spoke. First came the subtle withdrawal, then the misinterpretations, the passive concern, the sudden delays, the loss of momentum she couldn't explain. She asked God, did I do something wrong? The heavens didn't thunder, they whispered. You planted your promise in soil that wasn't ready. And that's where her story begins. Not in rebellion, but in revelation released prematurely. She thought obedience was sharing everything, but heaven was trying to teach her that not every dream is meant to be declared at once. Some are meant to be carried in secret until they bloom in strength. Now Naomi walks with a sacred ache, part regret, part reverence, because she's learning what every chosen one eventually must. Your calling is not fragile, but its timing is sacred. And if you've ever shared too much too soon, only to feel unseen, doubted, delayed, this story is for you. You're not crazy. You're not disqualified. You're in God's holding room, and the silence that surrounds you isn't the absence of progress. It's the protection of promise. Part 1. The unseen sabotage. Naomi had always known she was different. Even as a child in a quiet Carolina town, her spirit seemed to echo with something other kids didn't hear. While they played in sunlight, she listened to wind, wondering why it whispered her name. While others made wishes on stars, Naomi kept journals full of dreams that felt like divine instructions. By the time she was 41, she had learned to live in the in-between space, not fully understood, not fully released. But recently, the dreams had returned, vivid, urgent, prophetic, and she was sure this time was different. God was calling her out of hiding. For weeks, her spirit burned with revelation. Scriptures came alive like thunder. Words filled her journal like living water. Every morning she'd wake up before dawn, compelled to write. It wasn't random inspiration. It was blueprints, strategies, visions. The kind of sacred downloads that felt too weighty to ignore. Naomi believed she was finally stepping into what heaven had always whispered. But then, she made the mistake. She spoke, not just to anyone, but to Tasha, her childhood friend. Tasha had known Naomi since church pews and Easter dresses. They had gone through teenage crushes, bad breakups, and a whole lot of remember when together. If there was anyone Naomi believed she could trust with the delicate details of her destiny, it was her. Or so she thought. "I've been having dreams again," Naomi said, stirring her tea. They sat in a cozy cafe on the corner of Main Street, the kind of place with indie music humming low and sunlight spilling across reclaimed wood tables. "Not just dreams," Naomi added, her voice hushed with reverence. Tasha tilted her head. "Like God dreams?" Naomi nodded. "He's giving me a ministry, something to build. It's not a church, not traditional, more like a movement. For women, for healing. I even saw the name in prayer. She opened her journal, heart pounding. Tasha smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a pause, just long enough to be holy or hostile. Naomi didn't notice it then, but heaven did. The spirit recognizes what the eyes do not. As Naomi poured out the dreams she had nurtured in the dark, a spiritual shift happened. It wasn't visible, but it was real. Tasha listened with her head, but not her heart. Her silence wasn't sacred. It was skeptical. And when Naomi walked out of that cafe, something had shifted. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like her spirit had been touched by unwashed hands. That night, Naomi lay in bed wide awake. She had spoken her soul aloud. So why did she feel grieved? Not because she didn't believe anymore, but because something in her had loosened. The certainty she'd felt that morning now trembled beneath the surface. Was it pride that made her share? Or was it desperation for confirmation? Either way, her dreams felt like seed dug up too soon. Miles away, in a small house with ivy-covered bricks, Miss Leona was praying. Miss Leone wasn't just a prophet, she was a vault, a keeper of secrets and a guardian of spiritual instruction. God had told her to cover Naomi in prayer months ago. She didn't know the details, only that Naomi was carrying something fragile. That night, Miss Leona felt a pressure in the spirit. "Heavenly Father," she whispered, walking the floor in her slippers. Who did she tell? The Lord didn't answer with words. He answered with an image. Naomi's journal, open on a table, surrounded by shadows. Smiling shadows. Listening, but not interceding. Leona fell to her knees. God doesn't just bless, He protects. Sometimes the greatest warfare doesn't come after rebellion, it comes after revelation. When holy things are spoken in unholy rooms. And Naomi had just learnt that the hard way. Over the next few weeks, her clarity began to blur. The dreams slowed, the momentum faded. The divine energy she had once felt humming in her chest began to quiet. And worst of all, her excitement felt like it had been traded for exhaustion. She still prayed, still sought God, but the well had gone quiet. "What happened, Lord?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. No thunder replied, just the gentle weight of silence. That's when Miss Leona called. "Baby," she said softly, "I saw you in prayer. Something's been tampered with." Naomi wept. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Leona interrupted, "but you gave spiritual gold to someone who only saw glitter. You planted your promise in soil that wasn't sanctified, and now you're feeling the tremble." Naomi wiped her eyes. "Did I ruin it?" Leona's voice softened. "No, but heaven needed to teach you something before it got too far. Divine delay is not always punishment. Sometimes it's intervention. God was not angry with Naomi, but He was protective of what she carried. Just as Joseph's dreams led to a pit because he spoke too soon, Naomi's vision had faced interference, not from enemies, but from premature exposure. She had confused availability with trust. She had mistaken history with alignment, and heaven was reminding her, "What I give in secret must be protected in silence, until I say, speak." In the weeks that followed, Naomi fasted. She repented, not for dreaming, but for disclosing. She returned to her journal, not to write new things, but to seal what had been said. She no longer looked for people to validate the vision. She looked for altars to protect it. And one morning, something changed. It wasn't a dream or a prophecy, just a quiet moment with her Bible, a cup of tea, and a bird singing outside her window. She opened to Luke 2:19. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. And suddenly, it all made sense. Mary, the one chosen to carry the Messiah, didn't run to the temple shouting her calling. She carried it in stillness. Not because she lacked faith, but because she had wisdom. Naomi closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, make me like Mary." Because silence isn't suppression, it's stewardship. Naomi had spoken too soon. But now she understood the sacredness of spiritual concealment. From that day forward, she built differently. No more cafe confessions. No more updates looking for affirmation. Only whispers to God. Only counsel from the truly consecrated. Her vision hadn't died. It had been replanted in soil now soaked with reverence. And what was once rushed would now rise, in God's time, not hers. Discernment protects dreams. Not every listener is a safe carrier of what's holy. Premature exposure leads to spiritual sabotage, even from those who love you. Silence is not hiding. It's heavenly wisdom wrapped in obedience. Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and Daniel all practiced strategic silence. So must we. Part 2. Secrets shared, dreams shattered. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from betrayal. It comes from innocence, from trusting too early, too easily, too openly. Naomi had always been the type to see the good in people. She didn't just believe in dreams, she believed in sharing them, thinking that if God had given her something beautiful, surely others would celebrate it. But what she learned, painfully, is that not every heart can handle holy things. Not because they're evil, but because they're unprepared. The night it all came crashing down started like any other. She was sitting at her desk with her worship music on low. The rain tapped gently on the windows, the kind of night that made her feel close to God. Covered. She opened her notebook and began sketching ideas for the retreat God had whispered into her spirit. A healing retreat for women like her, tired, gifted, but bruised by life. Naomi had already seen the location in a dream. She saw the prayer circles under white tents, the late-night worship by the lake, the women falling to their knees not because of performance but because of presence. And she saw herself standing at the center of it, not as a celebrity, but as a servant. She was writing down the schedule when her phone buzzed. A voice note. It was Monique. Monique was from her old church, loud, funny, charismatic, and known for talking more than she listened. Naomi had shared a few things with her during a vulnerable season, thinking she'd found a kindred spirit. But something told her not to open this message. She did anyway. "Hey sis, just a quick thought. I was talking to Deja and Tasha earlier about that whole retreat thing you mentioned. And we're just wondering, don't you think you might be jumping the gun a bit? Like, I know you've got big dreams, but maybe God's still refining you, you know? Anyway, love you." Naomi froze. Her fingers clenched around the phone, not because of the words, but because of the tone. That syrupy, soft concern laced with invisible knives. She hadn't even told them the full vision. How did they? And then she realized Tasha had told Monique. Monique had told Deja. And now, her sacred calling had become coffee shop commentary. Some dreams die not by doubt, but by exposure. Naomi felt a tear slide down her cheek, not because she was embarrassed, but because something holy had been mishandled. She looked at her journal. It felt different now, like pages that had once glowed now sat dull under her fingertips. She slammed it shut, not in rage, in grief, because she knew she had opened the womb too early. The next morning, Naomi woke up with a heaviness in her chest. It was like her soul had bruised overnight. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Not because God was far, but because she had let too many other voices in. "Lord," she whispered, "I didn't mean to cast my pearls." The scripture rose in her memory like a rebuke and a rescue. "Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." Matthew 7:6. She had read that verse 100 times, but now it pierced like a sword. That day she didn't post on social media. She didn't text anyone back. She sat in the garden behind her house, silent, and repented, not for dreaming, not for planning, but for revealing what should have been protected. She thought about Joseph again, the boy with dreams of thrones and stars, bowing, the boy who told his brothers too soon, and ended up in a pit. What if Joseph's story wasn't just a cautionary tale about family jealousy, but about timing? Naomi stared up at the cloudy sky. I told the wrong people at the wrong time, and now my soul feels like a battlefield. And in that moment, she didn't need a miracle. She needed mercy. Enter Miss Leona. She hadn't spoken to Naomi in days, but that morning she showed up unannounced, Bible in hand, eyes sharp as prophecy. "Child," she said, walking through the screen door like she lived there, "let me guess, you're grieving a vision you think you lost." Naomi looked up, startled. Leona sat across from her in the garden. "You didn't lose it," she said gently. "You leaked it." Naomi said nothing. Leona continued, "When a seed is planted too shallow, even a soft rain can drown it." Naomi's hands trembled. "I feel like I killed it," she whispered. "You didn't," Leona said. "But heaven needs you to learn the difference between revelation and readiness. What God showed you is still real, but now you have to let it root again, in secret. There's something holy about rebuilding in the dark." Naomi stopped designing logos. She stopped asking people what they thought. She returned to fasting, to handwritten prayers, to early mornings where only God heard her plans. And little by little the weight lifted, until one night she dreamed again. This time she saw a vault, a room in heaven. Inside it were golden scrolls with her name on them. An angel stood guard. As she reached for one, the angel spoke. "Not yet." She woke up sobbing, not because she was denied, but because she understood. Heaven wasn't saying no. Heaven was saying, "Wait until your soil is deep enough to carry the weight." From that day on, Naomi became silent on purpose. She no longer feared obscurity. She honored it. You don't lose your dream when people mishandle it, but you must return to the giver to restore it. Oversharing is not transparency, it's often spiritual leakage. God will delay public release to preserve private sanctification. Your vision doesn't need validation, it needs protection. Until heaven says, "Now." Part 3. The Holy Pause. There's a moment between hearing and happening, a stillness between prophecy and platform, a pause so quiet it can feel like punishment. But for the chosen, it's the holy pause. Naomi was living in that sacred in-between. She wasn't running anymore, not from fear, not toward applause. Just still, just surrendered. Her mornings had become rituals of reverence. No phone, no voices, just the gentle hum of wind through trees and the whispers of scripture turning in her lap. One verse had captured her for days. "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. Not be busy, not be impressive, just still. And Naomi was finally learning. Stillness was not inactivity, it was intimacy. She had stopped asking God, "When will it happen?" and instead started praying, "Keep me ready when it does." That prayer changed everything, because somewhere along the journey she realized the promise wasn't lost, the hurry was. Miss Leona noticed. She stopped by with peach muffins and a knowing smile. "You look different," she said, handing Naomi a plate. "I feel different," Naomi replied. Leona sat beside her on the porch swing. "You're not trying to force the door open anymore." Naomi smiled. "I've stopped needing to." That's when the vision returned. It wasn't in a dream this time. It was in the silence. Naomi was watering her garden when suddenly she felt something shift. Not outside. She dropped the hose, her spirit trembling. A phrase rose up like thunder in her chest. "What I am building in you must outlast you." She fell to her knees, tears mixed with soil. She wasn't just carrying a vision, She was carrying a legacy. That's what the holy pause is for. To stretch you, to deepen your roots before the wind comes, to teach you how to carry all before you're asked to pour it out. For weeks, Naomi did nothing that could be seen, but everything that mattered happened. She restructured her prayer life. She fasted not just for clarity, but for character. She revisited old journals and marked every moment God had been faithful. She didn't ask him to speak louder. She asked him to help her listen deeper. One night, she lit a single candle and prayed aloud. Lord, I will no longer worship open doors more than I worship your presence. I will no longer rush what is meant to be rooted. I am yours, even in the pause. And heaven heard. 3 days later, she got a call. A small church in Georgia was hosting a women's revival. Their speaker had cancelled. Someone referred her name. They didn't want a performance, they wanted presence. Naomi paused. She almost said no, but something in her spirit whispered, "You're not breaking the silence, you're bringing what the silence taught you." She agreed. Quietly, prayerfully, carefully. She didn't post about it. She didn't text everyone. She fasted 3 days. And when she stood behind that podium, no spotlight, just stained glass and sacred hush. She didn't share everything. She just shared what had survived the silence. And heaven fell. Tears, healing, deliverance. Not because Naomi was loud, but because she had been refined in the quiet. Spiritual maturity isn't how well you preach. It's how well you pause. How long you can sit in the unseen and still believe you're seen. Afterward, a woman approached her crying. "I've been holding a dream for 10 years, she said, but I was scared to speak it." Naomi looked her in the eyes. "Then let God hold it with you until you're strong enough to carry it in public." They wept together. That's what the pause does. It transforms proclaimers into protectors. It teaches you to cradle glory like Mary did. Not in a stadium, but in a stable. The holy pause is not delay, it's development. God pauses public exposure to deepen private maturity. Your vision isn't validated by volume, but by obedience. When you've mastered the pause, you speak with presence instead of panic. Part 4. Mary's silence. Joseph's reaction. Joseph's reaction. Mary's biblical parallel, Luke 2:19. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. There's a silence that doesn't come from defeat. It comes from discernment. Naomi had always believed silence meant you were stuck. That if God had really called you, the doors would open wide, the voices would affirm, and your path would unfold in front of you like a red carpet rolled out by angels. But lately, all she had was stillness. No prophetic dreams, no signs in the sky, or just whispers of scripture in the early morning hours when the rest of the world was asleep. It was during one of those dawn moments that Naomi found herself sitting in her living room, Bible open on her lap, steam curling from a chipped mug of ginger tea. She had turned to Luke 2, mostly out of habit, wanting something familiar. But verse 19 stopped her heart cold. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. She stared at the words, letting them soak through her like oil. She didn't tell anyone, Naomi whispered. She just carried it. That's when the ache hit. A holy ache. Because Naomi had done the opposite. She had spoken too soon. She'd shared the vision God gave her. Out of faith, yes, but also out of excitement. Out of a need to be understood, to feel seen, to make sure she hadn't made it up in her head. But the reactions had wounded her more than she expected. Some had smiled, politely. Others had changed the subject. And a few had questioned her, not out loud, but in the shift of their energy, the way they subtly withdrew. And now, like Mary, Naomi sat alone with a sacred promise, but no one to affirm it. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Was I wrong to speak?" What came next wasn't thunder. It wasn't a booming voice from heaven. It was a memory. 3 months earlier, Naomi had been fasting. On day 7, the vision came. She saw herself walking through a field of dry bones. Then, suddenly, every bone ignited in gold light and rose like warriors. A voice said, "You will awaken what others left for dead." She gasped awake. The presence in the room was so thick it felt like oil. She wept. She journaled. She praised. But then she told too many people. Not everyone mocked her, but not one person affirmed it. And slowly, the fire dimmed. Now, back in her living room, Naomi saw Mary in a new light. She had the Messiah inside her, and she stayed silent. The thought was too much. Tears spilled down her face. "Lord," she said, "teach me to carry what's sacred, without seeking approval." Later that week, Naomi ran into someone she hadn't seen in months. Elijah, an old friend from ministry school. He had been there when she shared the vision. They sat at a cafe under an awning of creeping jasmine vines. Naomi felt awkward at first, unsure if he remembered. But Elijah brought it up. "Hey, that dream you shared, about the bones and the gold. I thought about that a lot. Didn't know what to say at the time. I was intimidated, honestly." Naomi blinked. "You were?" He nodded. "Yes, you spoke with so much faith. I didn't want to project my doubt. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was holy. I just wasn't ready to receive it." Naomi sat back, stunned. All this time she thought she had spoken too soon. But maybe she had spoken too widely. Some weren't mocking her. They just weren't prepared for what she carried. That night, she opened Luke 2 again. This time, she saw Joseph. He hadn't understood Mary's pregnancy. He'd planned to leave her quietly. Even he couldn't immediately embrace what God had done in her. It took an angel to intervene. Even the man closest to her needed divine revelation to see what she carried. Naomi pressed her forehead to the pages. "Lord, give me the grace to treasure what you've spoken, like Mary." And softly in her spirit, she heard, "Because your calling isn't fragile, but its timing is sacred." She began to shift after that. Instead of explaining, she began interceding. Instead of defending her dream, she began nurturing it in prayer. She found herself waking at 4:17 every morning, the same time, without fail. And each time she'd wrap herself in her prayer shawl, light a single candle, and whisper, "Lord, I treasure this in my heart. Teach me how to carry it." Weeks later, during a woman's Bible study, a young woman shared a vision she'd had in prayer. "I saw this figure walking through dry bones, and the bones came alive. I didn't understand it, but it felt like it was for someone else." Naomi gasped. But this time, she didn't speak up. She just wept quietly. Because what God had spoken to her was echoing. She didn't need credit. She didn't need validation. She just needed to know the scroll was still unfolding. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Mary's silence wasn't weakness, it was warfare. Her stillness wasn't fear, it was faith." And with that final realization, Naomi felt a divine peace cover her like a warm garment. She no longer needed to prove her promise. She just needed to protect it. God hides what's holy, not to shame you, but to shield you. Even those closest to you may not understand your calling until heaven reveals it to them. When you stop seeking applause, you make room for anointing. There is sacred strength in silence, and heaven rewards those who treasure what others dismiss. Part 5. Voices that delay destiny. Characters: Naomi's co-workers, jealous relatives, casual church friends. Wave: every conversation drains her. Revelation: not everyone deserves to hear what heaven whispered to you. Naomi didn't know when it started. The slow leak in her spirit. The way her peace kept slipping through the cracks. After every conversation, it wasn't obvious. No one shouted. No one cursed her calling. No one said God didn't choose you. But she left every lunch, every hallway chat, every prayer circle, tired. tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, tired in her spirit. Her co-workers smiled, asked polite questions, but there was a strain behind their compliments. "You're always so deep, Naomi. Do you ever just relax? I wish I had time to be spiritual like you." What sounded like light banter held weight, because underneath the words she felt it. Jealousy disguised as jokes. Cynicism wrapped in casual tones. Then there were the relatives. Family reunions always started the same. "When are you getting married? What happened to that job you turned down? You're still doing that God thing?" Their tone never outright mocked, but their energy always questioned. And Naomi would shrink, not visibly, but inwardly, folding her wings in so she wouldn't shine too bright. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to sound proud, but each time she dimmed her light to make others comfortable, she felt the spirit grieve. Even her church friends, people she thought were safe, began to feel different. Naomi had once opened up about her scroll, about the vision, the bones, the midnight oil. They had nodded, smiled, but over time the invitations stopped. The shared prayers faded. The group chat grew quiet. And one Sunday, she overheard them whispering, "It's just intense now. Too prophetic. She thinks she's better." That night, Naomi sat in her car in the church parking lot, trembling. "Lord, what did I do wrong?" The answer came as a whisper. "You gave your blueprint to people who don't build." That broke something inside her, not in bitterness, but in clarity. From that day, Naomi began to notice the pattern. Every time she shared something holy with unaligned hearts, her energy plummeted, her peace scattered, her clarity clouded. What she once called community was spiritual contamination. She thought being transparent was humility, but she had confused access with alignment. One Monday, her supervisor called her in. "Naomi, I love your passion, but we need you to be more flexible. Less faith talk at work." She nodded, smiled, but something in her spirit snapped to attention. "I've been adjusting so much I barely recognize myself." That evening she went home and laid on her living room floor. No worship music, no journal, just raw silence. And in that stillness, the Spirit spoke again. Not everyone deserves to hear what heaven whispered to you. It wasn't condemnation. It was protection. Heaven was guarding her scroll. She remembered Joseph, how he told his dream to his brothers, and they threw him in a pit. She remembered Hezekiah, who showed his treasures to Babylon and lost them. She remembered Jesus, who withdrew often, and when he healed, he said, "Tell no one." Naomi had spent years believing that if God spoke something beautiful to her, it had to be shared. But she was finally learning. Revelation is holy, and holy things must be held with holy hands. So she changed, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. She stopped over-explaining herself. She began praying before answering invitations. She deleted her half-written text replies. She held back her updates unless God gave her release. And strangely, her energy returned. Her spirit felt lighter, because she wasn't leaking anymore. She was sealed. One day, a former co-worker called her in tears. "Naomi, I mocked your faith before, but now I need it. Can you pray for me?" Naomi didn't hesitate, but she no longer needed to explain her scroll. She simply let her fruit speak. Naomi looked in the mirror one evening and whispered, "I don't need everyone to understand me. I need to obey the one who wrote the scroll." And in that moment she felt a surge of strength. Not loud, not visible, but rooted, unshakable. Some voices don't curse you. They confuse you. Spiritual fatigue isn't always from activity. It can come from misplaced intimacy. The wrong audience can delay the right destiny. God's secrets aren't entertainment, they're assignments. If your scroll feels heavy, check who you've been handing pieces of it to. Part 6. Discernment over disclosure. Naomi used to narrate her spiritual journey like chapters in a book. shared openly in texts, prayer circles, and social posts. At first it felt right, like testifying, like honoring what God was doing. But over time, something changed. She began to notice the pattern. After every update she gave to others about what God was revealing, doing, unfolding, she felt smaller. It was as if her revelations, once glowing in gold, began to lose color the moment they were placed into the hands of others. She didn't know why until silence taught her. One morning, Naomi sat with her coffee, phone beside her, fingers hovering over the share button on a heartfelt post. God spoke to me this morning about pruning in the hidden season, but something in her chest tightened. It wasn't fear, it was conviction. A holy nudge whispered, "This is not for them, it's for you." She deleted the draft, closed the app. She opened her journal instead, and something inside her shifted. The journal season. That morning marked the beginning of her sacred journaling era. She bought a fresh notebook, thick pages, linen cover, no noise. On the inside cover she wrote, "This is where heaven meets earth, in silence." Every morning after that, Naomi poured her soul into those pages. Not for likes, not for agreement, not for validation, just for the voice. There was power in the pen. It tethered her to truth without interruption. It anchored her in what God was doing within, rather than what others could confirm outside. She stopped broadcasting, but started building, stopped explaining, started excavating. One morning, she wrote, "My soul doesn't owe anyone an update. God is still writing. Why am I leaking ink before the sentence is even complete?" She paused after writing it. Read it aloud. "My soul doesn't owe anyone an update." It felt like a key unlocking something deep, reordering her days. Naomi began rising earlier, not out of obligation but invitation. She met the morning with stillness. Just her, a candle, a pen, no music, no distractions, just presence. The kind of quiet that stretches wide and holy. Sometimes she wrote only one sentence. Sometimes 3 pages poured out like rain. But every entry felt like building an altar, brick by brick. On paper, she wrote about the strange dreams, the way scripture glowed some mornings and felt hidden others. She wrote about what she didn't understand. She even wrote letters to God she never planned to send. "I don't know why you've made me carry something so heavy in secret, but I trust that even the silence has a reason." Spiritual solitude. Naomi began pulling away, not in bitterness, but in holy recalibration. She declined casual invites that once filled her calendar. She wasn't lonely. She was becoming aligned. She traded small talk for small prayers, crowds for quiet. Instead of a circle, she sought communion. At first people noticed. Some took it personally. "You've changed, Naomi. We don't see you anymore. Are you okay?" She didn't defend herself. She just smiled and said, "I'm being still." Divine visitations. The stillness began to bloom. Naomi started hearing God clearer than she had in years. Verses leapt off the page with new fire. Ideas dropped into her spirit fully formed. Business models, outreach strategies, intercession targets. She wrote them down, didn't speak a word. Sealed scrolls. No longer public announcements. Only the Spirit knew what she was stewarding. One night, while journaling by candlelight, a verse came alive. "There is a time to keep silence and a time to speak." Ecclesiastes 3:7. She whispered back, "This is my silence time." And the candle flickered as if to say, "Yes." The shift. Naomi didn't realize how much of her identity had been tied to being known, being understood, affirmed. She was celebrated. But the more she stayed hidden in the sacred, the less she needed to be seen. And strangely, she felt more anchored than ever before. Not because the world applauded, but because heaven was whispering, "You're exactly where I want you." She journaled that sentence in bold. "Heaven is not in a rush, so why am I?" Weeks passed. Friends stopped asking. The phone quieted, her calendar emptied, and her journal filled, page after page, revelation after revelation, tears dried on paper, laughter etched in margins, wisdom from dreams, prayers unspoken but not unnoted. One morning, Naomi walked to her closet and laid her hand on a shoebox full of filled journals. She whispered, "This is what obedience looks like." She held the box like it was sacred treasure, because it was. Inside were seeds that would one day bloom. But for now, they remained hidden, just as they should be. Silence is not void, its volume heaven understands. Stillness is not laziness, it's strategy. Your soul does not owe updates, it owes obedience. Not everything sacred is meant to be seen. When you stop leaking your light for attention, God multiplies it in secret. Part 7. Why they couldn't celebrate you. Wave. Envy disguised as concern. Symbol. A vision board. Naomi burns, only to start a new one in prayer. Spiritual revelation. Some people were never meant to understand your vision. Naomi once believed that the people closest to her, family, friends, old church mentors, would be the first to cheer for her calling. She thought they'd celebrate her dreams, honor her growth, champion her obedience. She was wrong. It didn't happen all at once. It came subtly, like rust beneath paint. At first, their reactions to her revelations were neutral, polite, measured. Then came the concert. Just be careful. Not everyone's going to understand you. You've always been intense, Naomi. Maybe slow down a little. God wouldn't isolate you like this, would he? What sounded like love was laced with something else. Fear, envy, control. But it took Naomi months to see it, because she assumed love always looked like support. One afternoon, she found herself flipping through her old journal entries, visions she'd once printed and pasted onto her vision board. The board was pinned above her desk, filled with scribbled prayers, photos of places she felt drawn to, quotes that burned into her spirit like fire. Dry bones will rise. You're not forgotten. You're being hidden. Go where the fruit is supernatural. But now, each quote felt tainted. She remembered the reactions when she'd tried to explain them. A cousin who smiled but laughed when she walked away. A church friend who asked if she'd fallen into New Age thinking. A co-worker who said, "You really think God's going to use you like that?" She looked at the board, then back at the journal, then at the board again. Something inside her rose, not in bitterness, but clarity. They couldn't celebrate me because they couldn't see me. Not the real her. The anointed her. The chosen, heard. The one who walked in visions instead of explanations. She stood slowly, pulled the board off the wall, walked it outside to the fire pit, and without fanfare she set it aflame. One match, one holy gesture. The smoke curled toward the sky like an offering. Naomi didn't cry. She whispered, if it was made for validation, it was never meant to last. Later that night, Naomi laid on her floor, Bible open, candle flickering. She prayed quietly, "Lord, I thought their love would protect me, but their fear kept me small. Teach me to forgive what they couldn't see." And softly, in her spirit, she heard, "They couldn't celebrate you, because your vision convicted their comfort." Suddenly she saw it clearly. Some weren't envious of her gift. They were afraid it might be real. Some weren't doubting God. They were doubting that God would choose someone like her. And some weren't mean. They were just spiritually asleep. Naomi rose, took a blank piece of paper and began drawing a new vision board. But this time, there were no pictures, no Pinterest quotes, no printed dreams. Just these words written in prayer. "Let it be done in silence and glory. Amen." That became her new vision. Not something to show, something to become. The next time someone asked Naomi, So what are you working on now? She smiled gently and replied, obedience. They chuckled awkwardly, but waited for more. She gave none. Because her glory was no longer for display, it was being developed in secret. Not everyone who loves you can see you clearly. Envy often disguises itself as concern. If someone's celebration depends on their comfort, they'll always withhold it when your calling costs them. Your vision board was never meant for the public. It was meant for the prayer closet. And when others can't celebrate you, heaven still can. Part 8. The Hidden Season. They didn't notice when Naomi stopped showing up to every event. They didn't ask why her online posts slowed to a whisper. And they definitely didn't see the shift in her spirit, how she began carrying her silence like a sanctuary. But heaven saw, because this was no ordinary withdrawal. It was the beginning of a sacred hiding. In the quiet hours before sunrise, Naomi knelt on her bedroom floor. Curtains closed, phone off, voice soft. She wasn't running. She was resting. She wasn't lost. She was concealed. And if anyone would have asked, where did Naomi go? They wouldn't have believed the answer. She went into hiding because heaven told her to. It started with a scripture, one verse she'd read 100 times. But on this morning, it pierced her like a whisper with weight. Whether this his wife Elizabeth became pregnant, and for 5 months remained in seclusion. The Lord has done this for me, she said. Luke 1:24, 25. 5 months of hiding. 5 months of silence. 5 months where heaven was building something in secret. Naomi read it again, and again, and suddenly she understood. Not everything God gives you is meant to be announced. Some miracles are so holy they require silence. Naomi closed her journal that day and whispered to herself, I'm not behind. I'm being hidden. She stopped apologizing for not updating everyone. She stopped explaining why she was suddenly unavailable, and for the first time in years, she felt safe in solitude. She wasn't isolating out of fear. She was protecting the prophecy. The world calls it disappearing. Heaven calls it development. Naomi knew what it felt like to live in the open, to share her ideas too early, only to have them questioned, to post her dreams online, only to feel them unravel in the comments, to invite others into her process, only to have their voices drown out God's. But now she was different. She had learned the cost of overexposure, and she wasn't about to abort another promise trying to get people to validate what they weren't meant to see. So she disappeared. Not into despair, but into the secret place. Not into depression, but into divine construction. Naomi took walks no one documented. She prayed prayers she didn't post. She built blueprints for a vision no one else was invited to view. Because what she was carrying, it was too early to explain, and too sacred to defend. There's something about secrecy that sanctifies, she wrote in her notebook. If the enemy can't see it, he can't sabotage it. She had shared too soon before, told people too much, let others' doubt become her own delay. But not this time. This time, she would carry this thing in silence, until heaven said now. The enemy fears what he can't find. In the spirit, Naomi began to realize, hell can't attack what it can't see. This hidden season wasn't punishment, it was protection. Just like Elizabeth, just like Moses, just like Jesus. Each was hidden before they were revealed. Moses in the reeds, Jesus in Egypt, and Elizabeth's miracle womb kept quiet for months. Why? Because some things must be shielded before they are shared. So Naomi embraced the invisibility. She deleted timelines, paused projects, started walking without telling anyone what she was building. And heaven smiled, because in the hiding, the weight was shifting. She wasn't shrinking, she was strengthening, no longer bound to prove herself. Naomi used to crave visibility. You used to measure her worth by likes, invites, and applause. But now, she was measuring her maturity by how quietly she could grow. No announcement, no audience, just her, and God. And in that stillness, she felt a sacred knowing rise. My silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She journaled every revelation. His scriptures lit up like lanterns. Blueprints from heaven flowed like rivers. And yet, no one knew, and that's exactly how it was supposed to be. One afternoon, a friend called, concerned. "You okay? You've been off the grid." Naomi smiled gently. "I'm okay," she said, "just letting God be the only one who sees me right now." She wasn't ignoring people. She was ignoring distractions, the noise, the pressure to explain what God hadn't released, the temptation to entertain people who couldn't steward her destiny. Concealed doesn't mean cancelled. The world had written her off. As that thought, she faded, assumed she failed. But Naomi wasn't gone. She was growing, in the quiet, in the secret, in the womb of her next season. Just like Elizabeth, people saw a woman retreating, but heaven saw a woman preparing. And just like John the Baptist grew in Elizabeth's womb, something was growing in Naomi. A voice, a message, a movement. But it wasn't ready yet. And so God whispered, "Don't unwrap the gift before its appointed time." And Naomi obeyed. She let her silence stretch. She let the hiddenness teach her. She let the darkness develop her like film in a chamber, where exposure too early would ruin the image. What she learned in the darkness. Naomi learnt the value of unseen seasons, where no one clapped, where no one commented, where no one knew the depth of what was being formed in her. And yet, she bloomed anyway. She bloomed in the dark, like seeds do, because God doesn't need the world to witness your becoming. He only needs your obedience. By the 5th month of her hiddenness, Naomi was unrecognizable, even to herself. Not because she changed her look, but because she finally looked inward. Her confidence wasn't loud, it was rooted. Her purpose wasn't proven, it was planted. And that seed wasn't for public display, it was for harvest, in due time. And when the time came to step out, she wouldn't need to announce it. Her fruit would speak. They thought I disappeared, but I was just becoming unstoppable. Part 9. Fianadine, Bakaresh, Log, Goth, Irek, Organic. Naomi hadn't been looking for a platform. Not anymore. She had made peace with the silence, found rhythm in the hidden place, and fallen in love with anonymity. So when the invitation came, a speaking engagement, an opportunity to share her journey publicly, she froze. It wasn't the offer that scared her. It was the timing. Because part of her still clung to the quiet, the safety of being unseen, the holiness of being hidden. Am I really ready? What if I mess this up? What if they still don't understand me? Naomi sat with the invitation, phone in hand, the cursor blinking over the words, "I'd be honored." But she didn't press send. Not yet. That night, she sat by her window, the stars outside as silent as her spirit inside. "God," she whispered, "you told me to hide. You trained me in the quiet. Why now?" She waited, then turned to the bookmarked page in her journal, Luke 1:24, Elizabeth's season of seclusion. But her eyes drifted further, to verse 57. When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. And that phrase stopped her. When it was time, Naomi closed her eyes, and in the deep place where the Spirit speaks without sound, she heard, "Daughter, it's time." Suddenly, all the mornings spent alone in prayer, all the pages soaked in revelation, all the nights she wept in the dark, wondering if she was forgotten, came rushing back like a wave of preparation. This wasn't just a moment. This was the moment her silence had been building toward. Still, her hands trembled. She had dreamed of the day God would release her. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she wanted it. The spotlight felt foreign. The invitation felt like too much. Until she remembered. God never gives platforms to perform. He gives them to pour. She wasn't called to impress. She was called to release, to share what was grown in secret, to speak what was whispered in the womb of stillness. The holy affirmation. Before Naomi replied, she prayed one last time. Lord, confirm it. That day, she walked to the mailbox. Inside was a letter from a mentor she hadn't heard from in years. It simply read, I don't know what God's doing in you, Naomi, but whatever it is, it's time to let the world see it. Her breath caught, and she wept. Because when heaven says, now, even the mail delivers confirmation. Naomi accepted the invitation, not with confidence in herself, but with confidence in the God who had prepared her in silence. The room wasn't massive, but it was full. Pastors, seekers, women who'd walked through their own silent seasons. Naomi stepped onto the stage, Bible in hand, her heart pounding in her chest. Not because she feared failure, but because she knew, this isn't my voice, it's heaven's echo. She took a breath, then spoke the first words. I thought hiding meant I was being forgotten, but God was building something in the dark. And now it's time to testify. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was reverent. And then the wave came. Naomi poured, not from her mind, but from her journaled fire. Not from performance, but from purpose. Every revelation once whispered alone now struck hearts like thunder. Tears fell, hands lifted, and in the back row, a woman whispered the same words Naomi once had. I'm not behind, I'm just being prepared in secret. After the event, Naomi sat alone again, a different stage, same spirit, and she whispered into the stillness, thank you for not releasing me too soon. She finally saw the full picture, why the silence was sacred, why the delay was divine, why the hiding wasn't rejection, it was refinement. Because when God says now, no one can stop what's been divinely timed. Naomi looked out at the sunset that night and heard the whisper again. This is only the beginning. And she believed it. Because hidden things bloom boldly when heaven says it's time. Part 10. The voice in the silence. The room was small, bare floors, a single candle flickering in the corner. No stage, no audience. Just Naomi, her Bible, and the weight of presence. She hadn't planned to sing that night. She had simply come to be still, to pour her spirit into the silence, and let God meet her there. But as she knelt, the melody rose, soft, unforced, like a river she hadn't realized was flowing inside her. No lyrics, just a sound born of reverence. A sound only heaven would understand. A sound that had no stage, but carried the weight of worship. Outside, the night was still, but on the steps of the old chapel a woman sat. Hood pulled over her head, tears already threatening her cheeks. She had wandered for blocks, unsure why she'd stopped here. She wasn't religious. She wasn't searching. But something in the air pulled her toward the building, like a whisper on the wind. And now, as she sat in the shadows, she heard it. A voice. Not loud, not theatrical, but tender, holy. Inside, Naomi didn't know anyone was listening. She was simply pouring what had once been held in for too long. Songs formed from her hidden season. Lyrics written in her journal between breakdowns and breakthroughs. This wasn't a performance. This was obedience. And obedience, even in private, speaks volumes. Divine intersection. The woman outside, whose name was Raven, was at her breaking point. Life had unraveled. Divorce papers signed. Job lost. Faith frayed beyond words. She had whispered just hours before, God, if you're real, let me hear you. Now, through the cracks of the chapel window, she did. Not in a sermon, not in a crowd, but in one woman's voice, singing in silence. Naomi's song wrapped around Raven like a blanket of light. It didn't shout. It didn't sell. It soothed. And for the first time in months, Raven cried without hiding. Something in that melody told her, "You're not forgotten. You're not broken beyond repair. This silence isn't abandonment, it's an answer." Naomi sang on, still unaware, but heaven knew, because what she didn't post, what she didn't publish, what she didn't even plan, was the very thing someone else needed to hear. A fruitful silence. After a while, Naomi stood. He blew out the candle and whispered into the dark room, "Lord, I pray this offering reach someone, even if it's just one." She never heard the door creak. She never saw Raven slip quietly away. Never knew the sound of her song would become a stranger's salvation. But that's how divine obedience works. It echoes louder than applause. 1 week later, Naomi received a letter in her mailbox. No return address, just a folded page that read, "I don't know who you are, but your voice saved my life. I was outside that night. I didn't knock. I didn't speak, but heaven did. Thank you for singing when no one was watching." Naomi's hands trembled. Tears welled. And all at once she knew. Her silence had never been wasted. Her hiding had never been in vain. Her obedience had borne fruit. Without fanfare, without filters, without force. God had used her voice in the one way she never imagined, by letting it sing in secret. Divine reversal. Naomi remembered all the moments she had begged God for visibility, all the seasons she felt useless because she wasn't doing more, and yet, what changed her life was never her platform. It was her posture, kneeling, unseen, unapplauded, yet utterly available. And God used that. She placed the letter in her Bible, right next to Luke 1:24. And this time she wrote in the margins, "What I sang in the shadows echoed into eternity." Naomi never met Raven. She never told the story on stage, never turned it into a sermon, but in her spirit she learned this. When your obedience is quiet, heaven gets loud, because sometimes the most powerful voice you'll ever carry is the one you only use in the silence, revealed in power, not in noise. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when the silence that once felt like exile suddenly becomes your sanctuary. When the very things that made you feel behind now prove that you were being held for something holy. Naomi didn't need applause. She didn't need a microphone. She needed fire, quiet fire. And it came not with lightning, not with fanfare, but with a whisper in the prayer room, one that reached a stranger's soul without her ever saying a word. Because true power doesn't make noise, it moves mountains in stillness. You thought your delay was a denial, but it was divine design. You thought you were forgotten, but heaven was hiding you to reveal you in power. You weren't being punished for being too quiet. You were being positioned because your voice wasn't meant to entertain crowds. It was meant to awaken callings. Naomi didn't rise through strategy, she rose through surrender. And so will you. The time is now. The scroll is unsealed. The silence has spoken, and your obedience has been heard in heaven. Heaven does not announce greatness with noise. It reveals it in fruit. And if you've been through the hidden season, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or mislabeled because of your silence, let this be your reminder. They didn't see you because God was saving the best for last. You don't have to prove your worth to be powerful. If God gave you the vision in silence, He will reveal it in glory. Stop waiting for everyone to understand before you move. They were never meant to see it. Obedience in secret creates fruit in public. Stay hidden until heaven says, now. Because when your time comes, you won't need to announce it. Your fruit will speak. If this story spoke to your soul, drop a comment. I remember. I remain. Share this with someone who's been in their quiet season, someone who feels forgotten but is really being refined. And if you believe this message is heaven-sent, support the journey, not for hype, but so more voices like Naomi's can be heard. The ones who remember are the ones who rise.